The efficiency of small spaces was the selling point. The agent, a woman with teeth too perfect for her face, had called it cozy, intimate, a cocoon for the modern urbanite. What she meant, what I understood in the bone-deep way, one understands the subtext of a rental agreement, was that it was cheap. So cheap it felt like a crime. A converted textile mill, the apartment was a single, open-plan box. The bathroom, a modest cube of tile and chrome, was the only room with a proper door. Everything else was a flow, a seamless continuity of concrete floor, exposed brick, and drywall, painted the color of old dishwater. The building was steel and concrete, a monument to brutalist efficiency. It was also, all things considered, fairly silent most of the time. No creaks, no groans, no settling sighs of an old house. The only intrusion was the distant, rhythmic thrum of the HVAC, a sound so constant it became a sort of auditory wallpaper. The first anomaly was the dresser. A simple IKEA mom, it was my only concession to traditional furniture in the otherwise minimalist space. I noticed it on a Tuesday. I'm a creature of habit. When I vacuum, I push the dresser almost exactly 2 inches from the wall to get the wand behind it, and then I return it to its place, flush against the paint. But on this Tuesday, it was 4 inches out. I blinked, pushed it back, figured I'd been distracted. But the next week it was 4 out again, and the week after. It was never more than that. A precise, maddening, consistent amount, as if something was expanding and contracting behind the drywall, pushing it out with a slow, patient pressure. The other sign was the Crawlspace, a square of plasterboard in the ceiling of the walk-in closet, barely big enough for a child, marked with a simple, recessed pull ring. The building inspector had called it a plumbing access, though the pipes for the unit were clearly routed along the opposite wall. It was an orphan space, an architectural afterthought. I'd pulled on it once, out of curiosity. It didn't budge. A month later, I noticed the ring was greasy, a dark, slick residue that transferred to my fingertips, smelling faintly of machinery and sour sweat. It wasn't oil. It was thicker, more organic, like the lube from a bicycle chain, but with a faint, coppery tang. One night, I went into the bathroom to take a shower and noticed pretty quickly that the small, 10-inch transom window above the shower was hinged open. This wasn't too alarming, as I, on occasion, propped it open after taking a shower. Maybe I had forgotten to close it. Then came the sound. It wasn't a ghostly moan or a spectral footstep. It was the wet, muffled percussion of something being forced past its natural limit. The sound of someone cracking their knuckles, but slower, deeper, and with a fleshy, cartilaginous resistance. I'd hear it in the dead of night, a soft pop, pop, pop from the direction of the ceiling. Or I'd catch it while watching a movie, a faint series of clicks from within the wall behind the television. I called my landlord, who quickly brushed it off as the pipes. But it was the sound of a body refusing its own shape, a sound that made the ligaments in my own knees ache in sympathy. I started to sleep less. The efficiency of the space now felt less like a feature and more like a trap. The bruises appeared on my right forearm and both shins. They weren't the mottled, chaotic marks of a clumsy bump. They were symmetrical, perfectly oval, about the size of a thumb, a deep, sickly purple that faded to a bilious yellow. My doctor, a harried woman with a distracted smile, called them pressure contusions. Like someone rested a heavy, narrow object on you for an extended period, she'd said, tapping her pen against my chart. In your sleep, perhaps? I didn't have any heavy, narrow objects. I had a bed, a duvet, and the suffocating proximity of the walls. The bruises were the shape of pressure points, the precise spots a hand or feet might rest to anchor a body while it leaned over another, sleeping body in the dark. The realization was so repulsive it felt like a physical blow. I was being handled in my sleep. I started sleeping with a knife next to me. I started leaving markers. A single strand of hair laid carefully across the seam of the crawlspace door, a dime balanced on its edge against the baseboard of the living room wall. The hair would be gone. The dime, inevitably, on the floor. The evidence was microscopic, deniable, a draft, a vibration, anything but the logical, screaming conclusion that was beginning to form in the back of my mind. My paranoia became a religion. I cleaned obsessively, not for hygiene, but for intelligence. I was dusting the radiator, a hulking cast iron relic from the building's factory days, when my fingers brushed against something tucked behind it. Not a dust bunny, not a dead insect. A piece of paper. My hand shook as I worked it free. It was a photograph, low resolution and muddy, printed on heavy cardstock. But I swear, it was me. It was just blurry enough to be deniable, but I wouldn't believe anything else. Through the dark fuzz, I could just barely see myself asleep in my bed. The angle was high, looking down from above my bed. I tilted my head back, tracing the line of sight with my own eyes. It came from the ventilation grate, an 8 by 10-inch metal grill set flush with the ceiling, its slats too narrow to even fit a hand through. And the picture was a clear shot, as though this person somehow removed the grill. I called the police. They arrived 5 minutes later. "I'm not doubting you, ma'am," the officer said. He was young, with a patient, practiced calm that was more infuriating than disbelief. "But there are no signs of forced entry. Nothing wrong with your door. No pry marks on the crawl space. No fingerprints on the radiator." "Because he doesn't use a door," I said, the words tasting like bile in my throat. I was pacing the small space of my apartment, feeling like a specimen under glass. The officer exchanged a look with his partner. It was a look I'd seen before. The look you give the person who is seeing things, the person who is one bad night away from a 5,150 hold. "We'll increase patrols in the area," the officer said, the finality in his tone a clear dismissal. After they left, I locked the door. I pushed a chair under the handle, a token barrier against an enemy who didn't believe in doors, as a small comfort. I sat on my bed and stared at the ceiling. I wanted to call my family. I wanted to leave. But given some issues I don't want to mention, I didn't have that option. A few nights later, I was half drunk on cheap whiskey, the bottle sweating on my nightstand. I was listening. The building was so quiet tonight. The HVAC, the background noise that had become my anchor, was silent. I listened for the clicking, for the wet, muffled pops. There was nothing. The silence was worse. It was the silence of something holding its breath. I had to get out, just for a few minutes. I pulled on my shoes, the movement feeling clumsy and loud in the stillness. I turned off the lights. The building hallway was a tomb of concrete and echoing footsteps. The heavy steel door of the building groaned shut behind me, and I felt a pang of something that was almost relief. The night air was cool on my face. I just needed to walk around the block, to feel open space. I was gone for 10 minutes, 15, tops. As I started walking back, I began feeling a dreadful pit form in my stomach. For what reason, other than maybe supernatural premonition? I didn't know. My heart started pounding a rhythmic beat against my ribs as I approached the door. I turned the lock. The door swung open into the dark. The apartment was just as I'd left it. Almost. The light in the kitchen was on, a single bare bulb over the sink casting a jaundiced, sterile glow. I never left that light on. My breath hitched in my throat. I was frozen in the doorway, my hand still on the knob. The apartment was silent, but it wasn't the empty silence of before. This was a heavy, anticipating silence. The silence of a predator lying in wait. My eyes darted around the room. Everything was in its right place. The bed was unmade, just as I'd left it. The dresser was flush against the wall, but the kitchen light was on. I took a step inside, my sneakers squeaking on the concrete floor. I needed a weapon. I needed to get to the kitchen. My kitchen knife block was on the counter, right next to the sink. I crept forward, each step a deliberate, nerve-wracking calculation. I could see the knife block now, the chef's knife, its dark wooden handle a beacon of hope. I was almost there. My eyes scanned the room, looking for anything out of place. And that's when I saw it. The kick plate under the kitchen cabinets, the thin strip of wood that covered the space between the bottom of the cabinets and the floor. There were scuff marks leading into the darkness. It was ajar, not by much, just a sliver, a 4-inch gap of darkness that hadn't been there when I left. I stopped dead. My blood ran cold. I couldn't breathe. My eyes were locked on that gap, that impossible, narrow gap, a space too small for anything bigger than a small animal, let alone a grown man. I held my breath. I listened. And then I saw it. A hand. It had unnaturally long, spidery fingers, each one tipped with a grime-encrusted nail. The skin was pale, almost translucent, stretched taut over delicate bones. It moved with a strange, twitchy deliberateness akin to a bastardized claymation figure. It slid out from the gap, its palm flat against the floor. Then another hand joined it. They pushed against the floor, and with a series of sickening, rhythmic thuds, something began to emerge. It wasn't a monster. It was worse. A man. He poured himself out from the darkness, a fluid, impossible shape. He was gaunt, middle-aged, in a sweat-stained undershirt and threadbare pants. His collarbones seemed to overlap, and his hips rotated at an angle that defied anatomy. He was a human origami, a mockery of the human form. I watched in stunned, horrified silence as he unfolded himself. The wet, muffled pops I'd heard for weeks now, happening in real time, right before my eyes. He saw me, his eyes, sunk deep in their sockets with a glazed-over yellow shine, widened in terror. He was terrified of being caught. I screamed, a raw, guttural sound that tore from my throat. I lunged for the knife block, my fingers closing around the handle of the chef's knife. He scrambled away, a panicked, disjointed gait that was agonizing to watch. He made some sound, not a scream, but something more carnal and animalistic. He moved with a terrifying, boneless speed, a scuttling motion that was all wrong for a man of his size. He was a spider, a cockroach, a thing that belonged in the cracks and crevices. He didn't run for the door. He ran for the bathroom. I followed, the knife held in front of me like a talisman. He was in the bathroom, a room so small I could touch all four walls at once. I saw him lunge for the window above the shower, jumping off the shower bench. I thought he'd get stuck. I prayed he'd get stuck. But he didn't. He had practiced this. With a visceral thwack that echoed in the small room, he dislocated his own shoulders. He didn't even flinch. He contorted his torso, his head lolling at an unnatural angle, and slid through the opening like a snake into a hole. He was gone. I stood there shaking, the knife hanging limply from my hand. I looked at the window, at the small, dark opening that had just swallowed a man. I could see the alleyway outside, the brick wall of the neighboring building. There was no sign of him. I sat in the corner of my apartment, the knife clutched in my hand, my back against the wall. I watched the door. I watched the windows. I watched the crawl space. I watched the kick plate. I listened for the clicking, for the wet, muffled pops. There was nothing. The apartment was silent, empty. I called the police again. They took a report. They looked at the window. They looked at the kick plate. They looked at me with a mixture of pity and suspicion. They didn't believe me. Not really. How could they? I barely believed it myself. That night, I quickly gathered my things and rented a hotel. 2 weeks later, I got a call. A detective. He said they had him. They had arrested a man in a neighboring town. He'd been found hiding in the insulation of a local elementary school. They'd caught him because a janitor had heard a strange clicking sound coming from the ceiling. His name was Reuben Cook, a 44-year-old former tunnel rat from a specialized demolition crew. A man with a rare connective tissue disorder, a disorder that made his joints hyperflexible, his skin unnaturally elastic. A man who could fold himself into spaces no human should ever be able to occupy. The detective, a man with a tired, world-weary voice, told me about Cook's history. He was a commensal predator, a parasite. He would live in the dead spaces of apartments for months, eating scraps, watching tenants, and God only knows what else. His file was a litany of disturbing escalations. He was previously imprisoned for folding himself into the trunk of a woman's car and waiting 3 days for her to drive to a secluded location. He was also linked to a case 3 years ago, where, after nestling into an apartment, he killed the tenant because they'd tried to install a shelf that would have blocked his hiding spot. I felt a strange, cold detachment as the detective spoke, a sense of relief mixed with a lingering, gnawing dread. He was caught. The nightmare was over. But then, the detective said something that sent a chill down my spine. "We found Cook's kit in the walls of your building," he said. "Kit?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "It wasn't just a sleeping bag," the detective said. "We found some wooden boxes. The smallest box, barely 12 inches square, contained a collection of your personal items: a toothbrush, strands of your hair, and a spare key." I felt the blood drain from my face. My spare key? I'd lost it months ago. I'd torn my apartment apart looking for it. I'd even had the locks changed, a useless, hollow gesture. He'd had a key all along. He could have come and gone as he pleased, but he didn't. He chose to stay in the walls. He chose to be a ghost. Even more, I wondered if he took my hair when I was asleep and most vulnerable. Had that been the reason for my bruises? His strange desire to collect my hair? And why my toothbrush? The medical exam on Cook was strange. The detective continued, his voice dropping to a low, confidential tone. He didn't just have a condition. He had surgically removed his own floating ribs and shaved down his pelvic bone. He didn't want to be a man anymore. He wanted to be a shape. And he's been in your walls since the day you signed the lease. The lease. The cheap, too good to be true lease. The one I signed in a hurry. The one I didn't read as carefully as I should have. The one that had bound me to this space, this prison, for a year. A year of being watched. A year of being a specimen in a cage I didn't even know I was in. I hung up the phone without saying goodbye. I couldn't breathe. The hotel room, with its generic art and beige carpet, felt like it was closing in on me. I'm in a new house now. Though small, it had a wide open floor plan with no crawl spaces, no attic, no basement, just space. Empty, blessed space. I have a security system. I have a puppy. I have a therapist. I have everything a person is supposed to have to feel safe. But it's not enough. My friends haven't helped much. They began giving him names as if it were all a joke. Flat Stanley. One joked at a dinner party, eliciting a wave of laughter. Another called him the Origami Man. That one stuck with me and permeated my mind more and more each day. I know they mean well, but they can't understand. The memory is a parasite burrowing deeper into my brain with each passing day. I can't sleep without the lights on. I can't take a shower without the bathroom door locked and 911 on speed dial. I can't be without a weapon by my side. I can't walk past a ventilation grate without feeling a phantom pressure on my skin. I feel an itch on my scalp, a ghostly sensation of a lock of hair being pulled. I can still smell the sour, coppery tang of the grease on the Crawlspace pull ring. Last night I heard the house settle, a soft groan from the floorboards, a gentle creak from the ceiling. I was out of bed in an instant, my heart pounding in my chest. I grabbed a ruler from my desk and started measuring. The gap under the front door, the space between the floor and the baseboards, the clearance under the kitchen cabinets. I measured everything, my hands shaking, my breath catching in my throat. The rational part of my brain knew it was just the house, just the normal sounds of a structure adjusting to the temperature and humidity. But the other part of my brain, the part that had been rewired by Cook, knew better. It knew that a man doesn't need a door to enter a room. It knew that a man doesn't need lots of space to exist. It knew that the world was full of cracks and crevices, of dead spaces and forgotten corners. It knew that, even if it was small, there was a chance prison bars couldn't contain an inhuman monster that could bend into any shape. And I couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere, in some forgotten corner of this new house, a man was practicing his craft, folding himself into smaller and smaller shapes, waiting. I still have nightmares. I still wake up in a cold sweat, my hands flying to my shins, my arms checking for bruises. I still hear the clicking, the wet, muffled pops. From blurry glances, I still see the gaunt face, the sunken yellow eyes, the unnaturally thin frame. The detective's words echo in my mind, a relentless, haunting refrain. He didn't want to be a man anymore. He wanted to be a shape. a shape that could slip through the cracks, a shape that could hide in plain sight, a shape that could be anywhere and everywhere. I'm at the kitchen table now, the morning sun streaming through the window, the rulers still on the table. I've been measuring all morning. I measured them all. I wrote them down in a notebook. I'm measuring them again tonight. And tomorrow night? And the night after that? Because I know, with a certainty that curdles in my gut, that Reuben Cook had a reason to watch me and keep me alive for so long, even if I didn't know what that reason was. And I don't believe he would give up on me so easily. So every time I hear a floorboard creak, every time I feel a draft from under a door, I find myself wondering the same thing. Wondering, with a cold, sickening dread, just how much space a man truly needs to fit. So every time I hear a floorboard creak, every time I feel a draft from under a door, I find myself wondering the same thing. Wondering, with a cold, sickening dread, just how much space a man truly needs to fit.